till now, we have seen that complex differentiability is not very different from the notion of differentiability, which was developed in your real analysis course. The definitions were similar, and some of the properties like the laws of calculus, the chain rule, etc., which are satisfied by differentiable functions, are also the properties which we explored in complex differentiable functions. In this lecture, we will see how complex differentiable functions are different from real differentiable functions. We will prove that complex differentiable functions are real differentiable functions which have some rigidity conditions. Let us begin by recalling the definition of a differentiable function yet again of a function from a subset of R2 to R2. So the setup is the following. Let f from u contained in R2 to R2 is be a okay. Recall that a function f from u contained in R2 to R2 is said to be differentiable. So I'll just write differentiable in this lecture. When I just use the word differentiable, it means real differentiability, which you would have already seen. And whenever I want to refer to complex differentiability, I will write complex differentiability. So this is real differentiability that we are defining right now or recalling right now. A function f is said to be differentiable at a point z0 in u if there exists a linear transformation, an R linear map. Let me denote that R linear map by df at the point z0. So at every point at where we are discussing differentiability, we have an R linear map, which I am denoting by df at z0. So remember that this is a map from R2 to R2. Okay, so there exists an R linear map such that f of z0 plus h minus f of z0, the approximate linearization is what I'm going to write. This is equal to df of z0 acting on the vector h plus o of h. So recall that z0, even though I am writing it in terms of in the form of a complex number, z0 is x0 plus iy0 plus for some x0 and y0 real numbers, and therefore when I write f of z0, it is a function on two real variables. H is also an element in R2. Okay, so this is the definition of a function f being differentiable at a point z0. We have a linear map df at z0 which acts on h. At each of those points z0, we have a linear map like this. So this is how we have the real differentiability defined. And if you recall, complex differentiability was not defined very differently, right? The function is said to be complex differentiable. Let me just write the corresponding definition for complex differentiability so that we can compare and try to see what more needs to be done. Differentiable at the point z0 if there exists a complex number. So now we are going to work on C. So this was happening in R2, so where H belongs to R2. Now we are going to identify R2 with C, and let's now work on the complex plane. If there exists some complex number f prime at z0 such that f of z0 plus h minus f of z0 is equal to f prime at z0 times h plus o of h. So this is again, the o of h is basically a function of the type h times e of h, where e of h goes to 0 as h goes to 0. So here in the second definition of complex differentiability, we now have a complex number which is being multiplied. So this is multiplication of complex numbers. The earlier one was a linear transformation. So this is linear transformation acting on H. Here it is multiplication of f prime z0. So complex multiplication of complex numbers of f prime of z0 and h. But then we have an identification of C and R2, right? So we would like to ask the following question. Can we say anything about one notion implying the other? An immediate answer would be that a complex differentiable function is always differentiable. So let me write that down as a lemma. A complex differentiable function is differentiable. There exists a total derivative. By the way, so let me go up and so df at z0 is called the total derivative at z0. So let me not write that down. All these things are notions which you would have seen in a real analysis course. So the df at z0 is called the total derivative of f at z0. It's a linear transformation, and if you recall, the matrix of this linear transformation is given by the partial derivatives of the component functions. So if f is u comma v or u plus iv in our notation, then the total derivative is dou u by dou x, dou u by dou y, dou v by dou x, dou v by dou y. The two rows is what I just mentioned. Anyway, those are things which I will assume for the sake of this course. Let me now prove that a complex differentiable function is indeed a differentiable function, always. And in order to do that, we just need to check that we do have one such linear transformation. But then we have a candidate staring at us. This is our candidate. So let's define. Let me not elaborate too much. Let me just say that with df at z0 on h defined to be f prime at z0 times h, the function is differentiable at z0. The only question is whether the function which we just defined is indeed R linear. I leave that as an exercise for you to check that for. So notice that this is just going to be if f prime at z0 is something like say a plus ib and h is equal to say x plus iy, then the left hand side is df at z0 acting on the vector x comma y, and the right hand side is this is just a plus ib times x plus iy. Let me just quickly write that down in terms of vectors. This is just going to be ax minus by and ab plus ay plus bx, this vector. So the identification of the coordinates in R2 and the complex number z, that will be done freely from now on. So it's your job to sit down and see when the variables are being considered as variables in C or whether it is being considered as variables in R2. All right, so I'll leave it for you to check that this particular definition, you would have seen this in a linear algebra course anyway. This particular linear map, this map which I have just defined as multiplication by f prime z0, complex multiplication by f prime z0, and then looking at it as a coordinates in R2, that's going to be an R linear map. That's quite straightforward. So the The more complicated question would be to talk about when is a differentiable function complex differentiable. So we would like to get hold of some complex number alpha, or rather f prime at z0, such that this is the map df at z0 acting on h is exactly like this complex number multiplied to h. Let's see when we can say that. That's also not difficult to notice. Notice that the first thing to notice is that a function t from C to itself is C linear. So remember that C is a vector space over C, a one-dimensional vector space over C. And if we have a linear map from C to itself, which is complex linear, then T of Z is equal to T of Z times 1, which is equal to Z times T of 1. This is because T is C linear, so Z times T of 1 should be equal to T of Z times 1. And this is equal to, well, always some alpha times Z, where alpha is the fixed complex number T of 1. So every complex linear map can be written as T of Z is equal to alpha times Z. And it's job to check that because of the commutativity of complex multiplication, every such map T of Z equal to alpha Z is going to be complex linear. So this is the exact characterization of C linear maps from C to itself. So our demand now is to see when is a real differentiable function complex differentiable. So if df of z0 on this is after all R linear map, right, is a C linear map, then by the above discussion there x is a complex number. Let's call that f prime z0 because it fits in our broad scheme of things. Then there exists some complex number f prime at z0 such that df z0 of h is equal to f prime of z0 times h, where h is in C. So left hand side, I'm thinking of h as an element in R2 after identifying C with R2, and right hand side it's a complex multiplication of f prime z0 times h. And this is precisely that we are looking for, right? We want df to be exactly of this type. So maybe rewriting it as a theorem, we have given one characterization: let f from U contained in R2 to, or maybe contained in C to itself be to C be a differentiable function. Then f is complex differentiable. Just rephrasing whatever we just discussed, it's complex differentiable if and only if df at z0 is C linear. Let's now try to explore the consequences of what we just did. So this theorem is the first theorem in the direction of trying to answer the question of when a real differentiable function turns out to be complex differentiable. Let us now try to see what are the implications of the characterization we have seen or we have given. We have seen that our R linear map df at z0 is now a C linear map, right? Let's see what happens if that condition is imposed. So let's take some arbitrary linear transformation. Let T from R2 to R2 be an R linear map, be R linear. And suppose this map, when considered as a function from C to itself, is demanded to be C linear. Let's see what happens. So suppose T is also C linear as a map, as a function from C to itself after identifying R2 with C. So any R linear transformation T from R2 to R2 can be described very explicitly. So since T is R linear from R2 to R2, we have real numbers A, B, C, D in R such that T of x comma y. So I will slowly move to the complex notation, but let me as of now treat these as vectors in R2. This is going to be equal to ax plus by and cx plus dy in the second coordinate. So in particular, we know that T of 1 comma 0 is a comma c. Now let's see what happens to the extra condition of C linearity here. If T is C linear, let's see what happens. Then in particular, T of I acting on x comma y should be equal to I times T of x comma y for all x comma y in R2, right? If in fact, if this is satisfied for I'll leave it as an exercise for you to check that T of alpha times x comma y is equal to uh, alpha times T of x comma y. So I have kind of abused the notation here. When I write I times x comma y, what I mean is I times x plus iy, and this is just minus of y plus I times x. So this left hand side is going to be T of minus of y comma x, and right hand side will be correspondingly whatever we get hold of. So I'm going to do this frequently now. It's your job to sit and carefully observe when what notation is being used. So I times x comma y is just the same as I times x plus iy. All right, so let's now apply this condition to very specifically to the vector 1 comma 0. So if x comma y is equal to 1 comma 0, what will happen? Then T of I times 1 comma 0 is minus of 1 comma 0 will be equal to I times T of 1 comma 0. But what is the left hand side and the right hand side? Remember that T of x comma y is ax plus by and cx plus dy. So this I should be a little careful here. This is not going to be minus 1 comma 0. This is going to be 0 comma 1. And we'll see that what happens. So the left hand side is going to be equal to ax plus by, right? So b comma d. And what is the right hand side? This is going to be I times a comma b, and that means a plus ib times I, which is equal to minus of b comma a, because it's going to be minus of b plus I times a. That's precisely what it is. So this tells us that b to be I times a comma c, ax plus by and cx plus dy. So it's going to be I times a plus c, and this is going to be minus of c comma a. Right, so this tells us that b is equal to minus c and a is equal to d. That is good because we know exactly what linear transformation we are considering. So consider, now let's get back to the setup we are in. So let f from u contained in R2 to R2 be a differentiable function, where x is total derivative of this function at the point z0, writing f to be u plus iv, where u is the real part of f, where u is the real part of f and v is the imaginary part of f. We can say that df at the point z0, this precisely equal to ux at z0, uy at z0, vx at z0, vy at z0. Remember that it's a 2 cross 2 matrix, the total derivative, all linear transformations. So linear transformations can also be thought of as matrices. I didn't write it down in the form of matrix, but this is just A, B, C, D times x comma y. And this A, B, C, D is what is being captured here. Let me elaborate on what the ux and uy's are. This is just the partial derivative of u along z along x. So this is ux at z naught, and others are defined similarly. Other quantities defined similarly. So basically, we are now in the setup of the description of linear transformation as given above, and the fact that df is C linear, if f is complex differentiable, that would imply that df is C linear. Then df at z naught is C linear, and that would imply, and hence let's go back and check what the conditions were. These are the conditions that we end up with. By the way, I didn't actually complete the chain of argument. You should also check that this is the necessary condition. Also check that this is sufficient. So any map, any linear transformation, any R linear map T from R2 to R2 given by T of x comma y is equal to ax plus by minus of bx plus ay. This map is C linear. So it's an if and only if statement that we have obtained. So a map, if an R linear map is C linear, then we are forced with B is equal to this equation. And if this equation is already imposed to begin with on an R linear map, then you can check that it is indeed a C linear map as well. Along with this observation, what we have effectively proved here is that R linear map T from R2 to R2, which is given by the matrix A, B, C, D, is C linear if and only if A is equal to D and B is equal to minus C. So I'm not writing that down explicitly as a theorem. However, please keep that in mind, because we are going to use that exactly here to talk about what happens when df at z naught turns out to be C linear. So we are in the setup where our df at z naught is captured by this particular matrix, and we are going to impose the condition of C linearity on this linear transformation, and that will tell us that the coefficients in this matrix are related to each other. We are going to exactly write down the relation that we will be getting. So we need to check for A being equal to D and B being equal to minus C. So if this is complex differentiable, df at z naught is C linear, and hence ux at z naught is equal to vy at z naught, and uy at z naught is equal to minus of vx at z naught. So these equations are kind of at the heart of all this. These equations are called the Cauchy-Riemann equations. Let me write down this characterization again in another theorem. Let f from u contained in C to C be a differentiable function, be differentiable at z naught in u, then f is complex differentiable if and only if For f equal to u plus iv, we have ux is equal to vy, and sorry, ux at z naught is equal to vy at z naught, and uy at z naught is equal to minus of vx at z naught. So these equations are called the Cauchy-Riemann equations. So let me just call this as star. The equations star are called the Cauchy-Riemann equations. It gives us a characterization which tells us when a differentiable function is complex differentiable at a point. As a corollary, we can also say an analogous statement for holomorphic functions. Recall that holomorphicity is the condition of complex differentiability being imposed at every point on the given open set. So let me write it down as a corollary. A function, okay, let f from u, which is contained in C to C, be a differentiable function. So whenever I write u contained in C all through this lecture, it has meant u to be an open subset of C. Okay. Differentiable function on u. So that means it is differentiable at every point on u. Then f is holomorphic on u if and only if f satisfies the Cauchy-Riemann equations at every point of u. Let us now look at the Cauchy-Riemann equations from a different perspective. Let's go back to the initial definition of complex differentiation that we had defined. So another definition was by considering the Newton quotient f of z minus f of z naught by z minus z naught, and by taking the limit as z goes to z naught where z is not equal to z naught in u. Let's get back to that definition and try to somehow get hold of the Cauchy-Riemann equations there. So recall that f is complex differentiable at z naught if limit as z goes to z naught of f of z minus f of z naught by z minus z naught, where z is in u minus z naught exists. And we said that this is a complex number which we denoted by f prime at z naught. Let's now try to look at this limit being approached in various directions. Keep in mind that this limit should be the same no matter what direction we approach it from. So to do that, let's first approach z naught along the direction parallel to the x-axis. So consider the limit along the direction parallel to the x-axis. So that means what we mean is this is basically the partial derivative of f in the direction of x. So we are looking at the limit as here we are looking at the limit as x goes to 0, x real numbers, such that f of we are looking at this f of z plus x minus f of z naught plus x minus f of z naught by x, where x is not equal to 0. And x small. If x is small because U is an open set, f of z0 plus x makes sense. And this limit is going to be our dou f by, this is precisely by definition dou f by dou x at z naught. Recall that this is nothing but this is just ux plus I times vx. Okay. Now let's consider the limit by going along the imaginary axis. Consider the limit along the imaginary axis. And then we have, this is just going to be dou f by dou y at z naught, or maybe I should be a little careful here. Let me just first write down what the limit is. Y goes to 0, y not equal to 0 of f I y going to 0. That's the direction we are interested in, right? So this is y not equal to 0 is the same as I y not equal to 0. This is the limit as we go along this direction, Iy minus f of z0 by Iy. This is also the same number as above, right? This is the complex derivative at z0. As I had mentioned, the direction in which we approach z0 shouldn't matter. In fact, if we approach along some arbitrary curve which passes through z0, the limit should be the same. If we approach z0 along a spiral which is going through z0, then the limit considered along that spiral should also be the same. We are just looking at along a line parallel to x-axis and along a parallel line parallel to the imaginary axis or the y-axis. Both these numbers are going to be the same. But if we just rewrite this, this is going to be equal to the limit as y goes to 0, y not equal to 0. I'll just take out the y out, I out, and this is going to be f of z0 plus Iy minus f of z0 by y. And that's precisely equal to dou f 1 by I times dou f by dou y at z0. To be very precise, this is just 1 by I times uy plus I times vy. And we know that the derivatives along both these directions should give us the same complex number. Hence, f is c differentiable implies that f prime at z0 is equal to dou f by dou x at z0, which is equal to 1 by I times dou f by dou y at z0. So the derivative f prime is equal to dou f by dou x, the partial derivative at z0, which is the same as 1 by I times dou f by dou y at z0. And if we write down the two expressions, this one, and equate it, we are going to again end up with the Cauchy-Riemann equations. This is another way of getting hold of the Cauchy-Riemann equations as a necessary condition for the functions being complex differentiable. So a consequence of this observation is that if we look at the restriction of a function f defined in U to the real line, suppose U intersected with the real line is non-empty, and if we look at the restriction of this function to the real line, and then thinking of this as a function on the real line, if we look at the derivative with respect to the only direction there, dou g by dou x, let's say that, okay, let me write it down. The point was that is going to be exactly the same as the complex derivative at z0. Let me just write down whatever I just said. Suppose U intersected with R is not empty and G is equal to F restricted to U intersected with R. i.e. G is a map from U intersected with R into the complex plane. Then we can talk about the derivative of G. And the above observation tells us that dg by dx, of course there is a imaginary, there's a real and imaginary part which I am capturing in this one compact notation. Dg by dx is equal to dou f df by dz at a point z naught is the same as df by dz at the point z naught. So if we abuse the notation of the restriction, the derivative of the restriction, and call it f prime, it's going to coincide with f prime of z0, which we had defined as the notation for the derivative, complex derivative of f at z0. So the abuse of notation will still be justified in this case. Let me conclude this lecture by giving an alternate way of looking at Cauchy-Riemann equations through what is called as the Wertinger derivatives. Let me define the Wertinger derivatives for you. Suppose f from u to c be a differentiable function. So the total derivative exists. Partial derivatives give us the matrix of the total derivative. At a point say z0 in u, define the Wertinger derivatives. Dou f by dou z at z0 and dou f by dou z bar at z0 by the following formulae. Dou f by dou z at the point x0, this is being defined as half of dou f by dou x at the point z0 plus 1 by I times dou f by dou y at the point z0. So observe that we started off with the differentiable functions, so the right hand side makes sense. And we define dou f by dou z bar at the point z0 to be equal to half of dou f by dou x at the point x0 minus 1 by I times dou f by dou y at the point z0. So remember that f is a complex valued function. So f is a function which can be written as u plus iv. So dou f by dou x is basically dou u by dou x plus I times dou v by dou x. Similarly, dou f by dou y, which is featuring here, is dou u by dou y plus I times dou v by dou x. That's all there. Nevertheless, dou f by dou z is being defined in this compact manner by looking at the partial derivatives of f along x and y. So it's a simple exercise which I will leave it to you to check that the function f satisfies the Cauchy-Riemann equations. So exercise. The function f satisfies the Cauchy-Riemann equations, which I'll write as CR equations, if and only if dou f by, okay, CR equations at z0 in u, if and only if dou by dou z bar of z0 is equal to 0. This is also alternatively sometimes called as the del bar of f being equal to 0. So you should sit down and check that this is an equivalent formulation of the Cauchy-Riemann equations being satisfied. So we had seen many examples of holomorphic functions and a few non-examples of holomorphic functions. Let's just I'll not revisit the holomorphic functions because there the Cauchy-Riemann equations will indeed get satisfied, and it is just a simple check which you should sit down and do. However, let's look at the non-examples for a better understanding of the Cauchy-Riemann equations. As an example, let's start with f of z being equal to z bar. And to check for the Cauchy-Riemann equations, one should be able to write this as f of x comma iy is equal to x plus I times y, and therefore the real part and the imaginary part can be written in the following manner. Then u of x comma y is equal to x, and v of x comma y is equal to y. Notice that both u and v are functions which are polynomial expressions. So in particular, f is a function which is differentiable at every point in R2. Let's see. So if the Cauchy-Riemann equations are being satisfied, the first Cauchy-Riemann equation was ux is equal to vy, and the second one was uy equal to minus of vx. So you should sit down and check that this is never going to get satisfied. Oh, I made a slight mistake because z bar is not x plus iy, it's going to be x minus iy, and therefore this is going to be equal to minus of y. And if you check the first one here, ux is going to be equal to 1 and vy is going to be equal to minus 1, even though the second equation